everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the SIP Shelter in Place series on the STIR podcast. I'm your host, Trish Muyco-Tobin, and right with me is my special guest co-host, author, entertainment columnist, and sitcom producer, Debbie Baldwin. Hello, Debbie.
Hey, Trish. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, well, of course. It wouldn't be the SIP series without Debbie Baldwin. So, Deb, the kids are back in school, whether they're in real classrooms or via Zoom. We survived the Democratic and Republican national conventions, so we are officially deep into the election season. And how appropriate for our subject matter today.
Yeah, and it's such a hot button issue for people, more so I think now than anytime I can certainly remember. I think it's always heated, but this is like next level. So it might be nice to, while still keeping your toe in politics, to relax and enjoy some really good movies.
Kind of escape a little bit, but at the same time, you're just like this election season, it's pretty edge of your seat stuff. So what we're actually going to do today is talk about our favorite political thrillers and what a genre it is. I mean, I must say for this genre of film, the overarching theme for me personally is this really strong, intense sense of foreboding and of something sinister. You're never quite comfortable. And for many of these scenes, you're not even comfortable even after the credits roll.
And I'm telling you, some of these movies, it's so well done. I can remember sitting in the theater watching some of these and just, gripping my seat. It's like that kind of thing where you want to hold the arm of the stranger next to you and like
that poor stranger next to you.
Yeah.
All right. So once again, just to show you the genius of this genre and how popular it is really over the years, our list spans decades. And we're going to start, actually, Deb, I want to start in the middle of the 70s, because the 70s were really fertile ground for this type of political thriller film. Probably, I'm thinking mainly due to the Cold War, Vietnam, Watergate, just fodder for a lot of great storylines.
Yeah,
so
and a lot of great novels too.
Oh, yes, exactly. And as you'll see with our list, a lot of these films are based on some of those novels that you're talking about. So we're going to start with 1975, and we're going to start with 3 Days of the Condor.
Which, honestly, I imagine this film, I imagine that they call it an elevator pitch when you're trying to sell your film in, 2 minutes or less in the time it takes you to, you get onto the elevator with the movie executive and say, what about this? And I imagine the elevator pitch for this film. And this movie starts off, Robert Redford has kind of a Joe job, analyst job at the CIA, where he pores over newspapers and publications to glean them for any sort of hidden messages. I mean, it sounds like a blow your brains out kind of a job.
Yes.
But he finds something unusual. And when he calls his higher-ups to report it, he then, the following day, goes out for lunch. And while he's at lunch, gunmen break into the CIA office in New York City and kill everyone in the office. So he comes back from lunch to find everyone dead and immediately goes on the run. Now, I mean, come on. If I'm like the studio head in the elevator with the guy pitching that to me, I'm like, make that movie, because it's such a good setup.
And it's kind of very relatable if you just think of that setup in and of itself. You're being the nice guy here, buying lunch for your office mates, and then when you come back, mayhem, murder. My goodness, what a setup.
Yeah, and Robert Redford, Faye Dunaway, Cliff Robertson, Max von Sydow, John Houseman, the fantastic cast. It's still timely today, this film. Trust no one. It follows that fantastic, political conspiracy thread, and it's just a riveting movie.
And I just really thought it was beautifully shot. You know, when you think of a spy thriller, you think of a film like this, just the aesthetic of it. And you've got these two hot movie stars, Redford and Dunaway, and sharing the screen together. It was just, you know, it had that look to it and that feel to it.
Yeah, it really ticks every box for the political thriller category, for sure.
And we mentioned Faye Dunaway. Dunaway in a later interview mentioned the fact that, you know, she and Redford got along really well during filming, although they didn't really get to spend much time together behind the camera, just because Robert Redford, during filming of this movie, 3 Days of the Condor, was busy prepping for the next movie, probably an even bigger movie for him. And that's what we're going to jump to, and that is 1 year later, 1976, and All the President's Men.
And yes, Robert Redford, back to back here. All the President's Men, Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, and it's the true story, or, you know, I think it
pretty much sticks to the book written by Bob Woodward and Bernstein.
And Bernstein, who are the two Washington Post reporters who uncovered the Watergate scandal. And so this film just reenacts that with a lot more pizzazz than I imagine it probably had at the time. I don't know.
More in the looks department there too.
Oh, for sure. If you compare the actors to the real men, not Woodward and Bernstein are attractive men, but I digress.
More in a reporter kind of way than a movie star kind of way.
Right.
You know what I'm
this film, you know, it's just a great reenactment of those events with the, you know, notorious Deep Throat as the source, who remained anonymous for decades and played in this film by Hal Holbrook. And it's a real edge of your seat, you know, you forget when you like start peeling the onion on these political scandals that, you know, as Hollywood depicts it, there's no limit to what people will do to keep their secrets.
I was going to say, so this is really a mark of a well-done movie, great screenplay, because you think you knew everything that had happened if you had lived during those times. You think, you know, you read about the twists and turns of the Watergate investigation, but at the same time, this movie was, you know, really edge of your seat and really well done.
Yeah, and when you watch it, you think, of course all that was going on. Like, of course there's all these machinations behind the scenes and, you know, trying to cover up the cover-up and all that stuff. But, you know, so yeah, it's a well-acted, well-written, riveting movie. I think I'm going to use riveting a lot today.
Riveting, yeah, exactly. Edge of your seat, riveting. So when Woodward and Bernstein wrote this book, Robert Redford already had his eye on that book. In fact, he was the one who bought the film rights from those reporters for $450,000 with the intent of turning it into a movie. And, you know, you mentioned that it really follows closely the book, the film does. One of the main departures, though, with this film, because it is a film and there are limits to the time here, the film only occurs during the first 7 months of the Watergate investigation, the scandal. And the other thing is that famous catchphrase, "follow the money," that was never mentioned anywhere during the investigation. It was never mentioned in the book. Its origins are from the film.
That's interesting. I did not know that. But is always the truth, I guess, especially in these kind of films.
Yes. So, and another interesting thing that I thought, you know, what to do when you have two marquee movie stars sharing the lead roles. How do you build that? And the way that they got around it, even though Redford was really at the helm of the film, you know, he purchased the film rights. They really did it diplomatically. Redford was billed over Dustin Hoffman in the movie posters, but in the film itself, you will notice that Dustin Hoffman is billed first before Robert Redford. So happy ending for everybody.
And that's why that's why agents have jobs. That's a backroom negotiation between their two agents and working out those details. I'm sure the actors probably, you know, I don't know if that's keeping them up at night, but
probably not. All right, so we are going to go about a decade from the Watergate scandal, from All the President's Men, and we are going to talk about a 1987 film, and it was based on a novel by Kenneth Fearing, a 1946 novel called The Big Clock. And this film starred what a lineup, Kevin Costner, Gene Hackman, Will Patton, and Sean Young. And we are, of course, talking about No Way Out.
And, you know, this movie had kind of slipped my mind when I was coming up with the list. And then all of a sudden it just, hit me. I'm like, of course. I mean, what a fantastic political thriller. It's such a great plot. I mean, it's so rare that you sit in a movie and actually think this is genius. Like, what a screwball bunch of series of events that are all conspiring to make this happen. And then it's not what you think it is. But Kevin Costner plays a naval lieutenant commander.
Lieutenant Tom Farrell.
Gets hired to work in the Pentagon and meets a beautiful young woman and has a short affair with her because I guess he travels a lot or whatever. It's not like a long-term thing. A brief encounter, let's say. This woman also happens to be having an affair with the Secretary of Defense, who's played by Gene Hackman.
Who would be Lieutenant Tom Farrell's boss.
Correct.
Yes.
And meanwhile, Kevin Costner's character, Tom Farrell, discovers some information that might implicate the Secretary of Defense in something. The Secretary of Defense is going to see his mistress, just as the Kevin Costner character is leaving her condominium. The Secretary of Defense gets jealous that another man has been in her apartment. And in a fit of jealous rage, as they say, he kills her. That's the setup then becomes to cover this murder. They dig up this old Cold War myth of Yuri, the planted Soviet spy who's climbed high within the US military or US government. And they're going to reawaken this myth of Yuri to try and divert the attention from Bryce's involvement in this woman's murder. And it's just, I'll stop talking right there because
we don't want to ruin it for everybody.
Yeah.
And
No
you
spoilers.
must see this movie.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about some of those moments in the film, I just keep thinking about there's so many iconic scenes in this film. When you talk about the encounter between Kevin Costner's character and Sean Young, in the limo, and how she goes out. I mean, that was nightmarish for me at the time when I saw it.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of the discussion into this movie, just mentioning Kevin Costner as Lieutenant Tom Farrell and just picturing him in those navy whites. I mean, I started getting hot. He was so hot in this movie. He was just perfect.
Yeah.
Apparently many considered this to be the movie that really launched Kevin Costner as a bona fide movie star. His bankability as a leading man really came from this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I love Kevin Costner. Most of his movies, with a few obvious exceptions, are fantastic. I wouldn't describe him as an actor with a huge range.
No.
And
this movie
was right in his wheelhouse. Yeah. And that tryst you were describing between Sean Young and Kevin Costner at the beginning of the movie, I mean, that has to be on some list of the steamiest, without being overly revealing, was such an erotic, really good, well-shot, romantic, steamy scene.
Right up there, probably with like 9.5 weeks. And
right off the bat, though, that movie just sucks you into that whole storyline and it never lets you go. It's a great film.
Okay, so speaking of really, really hot men here, so
there's
Debbie,
a lot on this list.
Debbie, about 37 minutes into the movie, do you notice the person behind Kevin Costner? I believe it was still the scene, they were still at the gala, And it was during that Maori dance scene. I mean, this was from a long time ago, but they were at the gala where they kind of all meet together. Behind Kevin Costner is a very young Brad Pitt. It was in an uncredited role. Of course, Brad's not going to make waves until a few years later with Thelma and Louise, but he was in this movie as an extra during that gala.
Now I have to rewatch it. That is such a good little factoid.
37 minutes, 27 seconds
Okay.
the movie, I'm told. So there you have it.
Okay. All right.
So now we're going to jump into 1990. And again, this is one of those movies. It just had that just grandiose feel to it. I loved watching it. And I'm talking, of course, about The Hunt for Red October.
I mean, this is such a fantastic list. I mean, not patting myself on the back of it here, but honestly, these movies would almost, most of them be on my top 10 list of all movies.
Oh, you're right about that. Yeah.
And so 1990, Hunt for Red October, based on the Tom Clancy novel of the, famous best-selling Jack Ryan series, starring Sean Connery. Alec Baldwin is the first actor to play Jack Ryan.
Yes, this is the first.
And
yes.
This is the story. Sean Connery plays a Soviet naval commander of a nuclear sub who is, we think, attempting to defect. And it is the, I don't think that's a spoiler. He is attempting to defect.
I think that was the setup of the movie.
However, the U.S., the higher-ups within Alec Baldwin's office question the intelligence of bringing a Soviet nuclear sub into U.S. waters voluntarily.
As you would.
If the Sean Connery character has nefarious intentions,
yes.
He's right off the coast of Washington, D.C. So it is basically the story of the Alec Baldwin character, Jack Ryan, trying to diplomatically handle this defection without anyone getting killed, and everything's on a tightrope. It's a hair trigger the entire movie. You're so fearful that these characters, the most amazing thing about these characters, and this is a credit to Clancy and the acting, is as the viewer, you're so invested in this working out for these Russians that you really, you're sitting in the audience and you're just hoping that it all works out for them.
I know. And this, I remember seeing it in the theater. Much of the action takes place in those submarines. They're not real submarines because, of course, you can only imagine what kind of a challenge it would be to shoot inside an actual submarine. So they actually built replicas and the interiors on a soundstage lot on the Paramount back lot, apparently. And even with that, Sean Connery would later reveal in an interview that it was still claustrophobic. So, but as a moviegoer, you experienced that as well. And I don't know if it was the lighting or the music or whatever. You felt so claustrophobic with the characters.
Very well directed cinematography.
Yes.
You really got the sense that you were in that tight space with them. And that in itself amplifies the tension for the audience because, there's no escape. It really brings home that sense of it's either going to work or it's going to be horrible,
So we mentioned that Alec Baldwin was the first person to play Jack Ryan in the Jack Ryan series. That for the rest of that decade and the following decade, you really have this explosion of Jack Ryan movies. Mm-hmm. The very first choice to actually play Jack Ryan for this film was Kevin Costner. Speaking of Mr. Costner, but he had turned it down because he already had his eyes set on directing and starring in Dances with Wolves. So that's why.
And I think that worked out very well because as fantastic as Kevin Costner was in Dances with Wolves, and he has the Academy Awards to prove it, Alec Baldwin is a much more impassioned actor on screen. And so his performance, I thought he was fantastic in that movie.
Okay, so the backstory apparently with Alec Baldwin, though, the producers, the filmmakers like him as well. But when time had come for the next film, which was Patriot Games, he wanted more money.
Uh-huh.
And then I don't know if this is true or not. The studio said, well, for that amount of money, we could hire Harrison Ford. Guess what? They hired Harrison Ford. And that is who you see as Jack Ryan in Patriot Games. Harrison Ford actually was also approached for Jack Ryan in The Hunt for Red October, but after reading the script, he reportedly declined because he thought that the plot focused too much on Sean Connery's character, which was Captain Ramius or Ramius.
Mm-hmm.
So he declined. He wanted the plot to focus on Jack Ryan, and you can kind of notice that with Patriot Games. It was more Jack Ryan focused.
And unfortunately, I think that the flaw, I understand these studios and saying to these actors, you know, everyone's replaceable. Like there's, you know, you're fungible goods. You're a dime a dozen. I can find any A-lister to step in and take this role. Did a disservice to the series. They started with Alec Baldwin, they switched to Harrison Ford, they switched then to Ben Affleck. And the series lost the cohesion.
I agree.
Of you know, it's like the Mission Impossible movies or the James Bond movies. Like it really could have been one of those, the Jack Ryan series. And then John Krasinski took it over on streaming to play Jack Ryan in a series.
Right.
So there's no sense of continuity. When I think of Jack Ryan, I don't think of any specific actor. And even though there have been a lot of James Bonds, you know, they make 5 or 10
there's
movies.
There's still that consistency.
It's more like an era as opposed to just constantly this revolving door of Jack Ryan's, which was too bad because I think it really.
It is too bad because these movies are so well made, and so you are invested in those characters.
Yeah.
So for Hunt for Red October, you bought into Alec Baldwin, and then to see a different one, yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah.
That's something. All right. So we are going to move on to 1997, and we are moving on to a film called The Jackal. What a lineup. Bruce Willis, Richard Gere, Sidney Poitier. Oh my goodness.
Now I think that this film I may get some blowback. It was not as well reviewed as most of the films on this list. I think Bruce Willis may have been miscast only in the sense of his identity at the time or his persona at the time as opposed
Mr.
to
Die Hard.
But this movie is based on a novel by Frederick Forsyth and is a remake of I think it was in the 70s and maybe late 70s, a very good film, and that both of those were called The Day of the Jackal. This takes the same storyline and remakes it, and the story is about an assassin who is a man of many faces who is going to kill the vice president. And so Bruce Willis plays the assassin. The Secret Service goes to an old IRA, the one man who's seen the Jackal, who's the assassin, and an old IRA guy who's incarcerated, played by Richard Gere, who again, he was criticized for his Irish accent. I thought it was fine. Anyway, I'm saying this like it's a horrible movie. It's a great movie, riveting. Bruce Willis does a great job playing this assassin. Every costume, every time he alters his appearance, it's fantastic. It's totally believable, and you'd never link the guy from the scene before to the guy from the next scene. And the plot, the way the plot, doesn't end, makes a sharp turn at the end with the twist is great. And any time the Jackal's on, I will watch it. So that's what it takes to make the list for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right about that, though. It was a fun movie to watch.
Yes.
I love the plot itself, and
that's
the
it.
lineup of actors. It was great.
and it wasn't in that what we're used to in a political thriller, that kind of dark, like the Ghost Rider. When you watch the Ghost Rider, the whole film is gray and misty. It's so beautifully shot. This film was a little more Die Hard meets political thriller.
Yes. And that's what makes it a fun choice, you know?
It's definitely got a much more involved action component to it, for sure.
Yes. And do you remember one of my favorite funny men, Jack Black, is in this movie, and he plays like an underground gun dealer or something. And he crosses paths with a Jackal over this one machine gun or something that he was telling him. And so apparently Jack Black's instructions from the director were to act stupid and annoy Bruce Willis during that scene, to which he did with great effect, and apparently so well done that it did not end well for him in the movie. But this is, of course, a few years before Jack Black's breakout role in High Fidelity with John Cusack. But yeah, I mean, I completely forgot that, you know, it wouldn't have occurred to me that it was the Jack Black, because again, we didn't know of Jack Black then. But
right, he's like, who's that funny guy?
Exactly. All right, so from 1997, we're going to jump to 2005, and we are going to talk about Munich. It is produced and directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Eric Bana, Daniel Craig, Jeffrey Rush, and Deb, you know, maybe perhaps not so surprising, this was one of Spielberg's lowest grossing films domestically, and but definitely highly acclaimed. It was received 5 Oscar nominations, but came up empty on the big night.
And I would say that it is you know, because Spielberg is so invested in some of the issues of Israel, and you know, his films about World War II, you know, this was an issue, a story to him that obviously really hit close to his heart. And it's the actual story of the assassination of the Israeli Olympic athletes at the Munich Olympics. And then the movie is basically Israel's retaliation.
Right.
Mossad, the Israeli
Secret Service.
Retaliation for that assassination under Golda Meir. And it's basically a true revenge tale. And in so many ways, it's a riveting film, but it is slow paced. It is a true story. And you know that Spielberg would not have enhanced the movie to make it more theatrical at the sacrifice of the truth of the story. So it's a little slower paced. It's a little more academic. It's a little more, it's a little less because it's what actually happened. And I'm sure, you know, as in all things, the truth is not as, you know, white knuckle as the, things happen in Hollywood.
Right. So, but I think though, for this movie, which I did enjoy seeing, if you are along for the ride, I think that, you will be rewarded at the end. And that's how I felt with this movie, with its resolution.
Yeah. And it's a different kind of political thriller than, 3 Days of the Condor or No Way Out. It's a true story, and it's a sad story all around. And but it's a beautiful film. Daniel Craig in one of his earlier roles. Yeah. Eric Bana also. The acting is fantastic. And obviously, Spielberg's direction is, he puts a ton of love into his projects, and you can see it here for sure.
I think so. And I thought that, the final scenes of the movie was a little bittersweet, not just because of the storyline, but of course, this movie takes place in the 70s, but the film was released in 2005. So you had a shot of the Manhattan skyline, and the World Trade Towers had to be recreated with CGI special effects. So that was a little poignant for those of you who caught that at the end of that movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, Spielberg's a genius when it comes to, you know, striking the viewer with a little, you know, knockout punch like that.
Yeah,
Subtly, a subtle knockout punch. There's something, if there's such a thing.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier on the movie Ghost Rider, which came out in 2010. I love this movie, Deb. Oh my gosh, what a movie. I love this movie.
If I can remember walking into the movie theater at Frontenac, knowing nothing about it, which almost never happens to me. And I cannot tell you how good this movie is. If you have never seen Ghost Rider, starring Ewan McGregor and Pierce Brosnan, get it on Amazon Prime or Netflix, wherever you can find it, and watch it immediately.
FYI, it is free on YouTube right now.
All right, you have no reason, and what a great evening. I mean, what a great way to spend the evening. I mean, Ewan McGregor, who is his character's unnamed in the film, he is just the Ghost Rider.
Referred to as the Ghost, the Ghost Rider,
and is hired to complete the autobiography of a retired British Prime Minister, Alan Lang, who's played by Pierce Brosnan. He goes out to Martha's Vineyard and to their country home. The Prime Minister and his wife and his mistress is there, his assistant, who's played by Kim Cattrall from Sex and the City.
Yes.
And well, first of all, the original Ghost Rider has died mysteriously in an accident. He's drowned in an accident.
Yeah, so Ewan McGregor is the second one to
replacement
be hired to replace the former Ghost Rider.
And so suffice it to say that McGregor's character, the Ghost Rider, discovers in the previous Ghost Rider's manuscripts some suspicions the Ghost Rider had that the former Prime Minister was involved in essentially war crimes. It was transporting prisoners with help of the CIA to the United States to be enhanced for enhanced interrogation.
Yes, enhanced, a euphemism, yes, enhanced interrogation.
So McGregor's character immediately becomes the focus of the people wanting to protect the secret. There's so much more going on than you think, though. And as I mentioned before, the way this film was shot, Roman Polanski directs. This film is perfect. I mean, honestly, the beauty of these always gray, overcast days on the vineyard and the ferry rides, everything about it is perfectly created for this mystery, the suspense, even the house itself, the way this ultra modern, contemporary, very stark home with lots of choppy rooms, and
house is an understatement. It's this beautiful contemporary beach house.
Yes.
Oh my gosh! And you're right. I mean, the entire time, the viewer is just very unsettled. You know, something's up. You don't know what's up.
And you're so sucked in. It's like it's like you can't get out of the house.
So, of course, this is a work of fiction, but it is highly suggestive of, the life and goings on with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and his special relationship with the U.S. I mean, especially with the Bush administration. We have parallels in this movie. We have parallels of Halliburton, the War on Terror. Even the fictional Secretary of State in the movie looks really looks like Condoleezza Rice. So, in case you needed to be convinced some more, there is a scene where the ghost is in a cab and he was checking out this manuscript that was handed to him. And while he's doing that, he found out that the manuscript has 624 pages. And coincidentally, Tony Blair's autobiography, his memoir, came out the exact same year that this movie came out. The memoir was called The Journey. And guess what? The Journey has 624 pages. So, very, very eerie. And you're right about those shots, the cinematography, the dim lighting. Almost very Hitchcockian to me, Deb.
Very.
All the way down to the end scene with the passing of the notes.
Yes.
Very Albert Hitchcock. It's what it reminded me of.
Yes, I agree totally. It's I mean, and modernized so well, inspired by Hitchcock with those Hitchcock roots of these visual cues of the things around the actors in the apartment, the way they're shot, the position of the camera, all that stuff. And then in this, again, the fact that the house is so modern, the crime itself that they're investigating is so modern. I mean, you know what I mean by modern?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Excellent movie.
Current is, I guess, a better word.
Yeah. Really, really good movie. So again, guys, it's on YouTube right now and it's free. I don't know for how long, but I really would take advantage if I were you.
Yeah.
So
it's a great way to spend an evening. What an interesting film.
Yeah. So moving right along, we are going to jump on over to the year 2011. Another great movie. The lineup is just mind-blowing for me. And that is the Ides of March. We've got George Clooney, Ryan Gosling, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Paul Giamatti, among others. Wow, this was another movie that, just kind of left you with an icky feeling.
It's really exposes the dark underbelly of a political campaign. It is based on a play written, and the screenplay was also written by the playwright, Beau Willimon, who is a John Burroughs School graduate.
Yes.
So local
boy, yes.
He's also the creator of House of Cards.
Correct.
This story is Ryan Gosling plays a junior campaign worker on a campaign for the presidential Democratic primary. His candidate, played by George Clooney, is competing for the nomination with another candidate. And I mean, I don't know how far you want to dig into this plot. It's very complicated. It's
very, very complicated. I think that was the fun part of the movie is the twists and turns of the plot. Clooney's character, he is playing a Democratic Governor Mike Morris, who is running for president. You're right.
And so it's just the way it is like watching a game of chess to see, all of a sudden you've been outmaneuvered and you're exposed in your career. Ryan Gosling gets in a little over his head. He's an idealist. He's naive. He's young to the game. He doesn't really understand the depth of deceit and conspiracy and that needs to go on to survive in politics. You never know who to trust. And
exactly. That was what was unsettling about this movie. Every one of the major players, you don't know if you can trust them, and it doesn't really resolve itself until the very end.
And you can't. I mean, Ryan Gosling's character is in the same. That's what makes this movie great. Is that Ryan Gosling's character is kind of in the same boat as the audience. Like, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character seems trustworthy. Oh, and I agree with him. Go talk to him. But it turns out he's, you know what I mean? It's like you're going through it along with him, but trying to figure out if there's anybody who's a good guy.
Right. So excellent movie for this election season.
Yes.
If you've seen it, you'll notice several references to real life presidential campaigns. George Clooney's character, Governor Mike Morris. There were signs that said, "I like Mike," referencing "I like Ike" from President Eisenhower's campaign.
Right.
And also those campaign posters, some of the campaign posters for Clooney's character had the same look of that iconic Hope poster that was making around the rounds during President Obama's 2008 campaign. So
Yes.
you'll see little touches here and there that kind of add a little bit more accuracy and realism to the story. All right, so we're going to move on to the following year, 2012, which was the year of a movie called Argo. Argo won the Academy Award for Best Picture that year.
Argo, I mean, I can't imagine many viewers have not seen Argo, but if you have not seen Argo, I would go see it or, get it, download it. It stars and is directed by Ben Affleck, who won the Oscar for, I think, producing it. I'm not sure.
They won Best Picture, yes.
They won Best Picture.
Yes.
But I don't think he won Best Director, but I'm not sure.
No, this picture was nominated for, I think, 7 Oscar nominations. It won Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Editing.
And it is the story of the Iran hostage crisis. When in retaliation for something Jimmy Carter did, this is like, I was a kid when this happened, I'm like, something bad happened and then the Iranians did something bad. They stormed the U.S. Embassy and took 60 hostages. And this particular story is the story of the U.S. extracting 6 diplomats from the embassy under the guise of shooting a movie. So, and it's true. This is, it has been.
And it's true. Yeah, it really happened.
Right, that this actually happened. What a fantastic cast. Bryan Cranston, Alan Arkin, John Goodman, working this con to get these hostages out of this embassy, posing as actors in this film. It's a very entertaining, funny, but also very tense political thriller.
And I really thought that the beauty of the film was just watching this whole scheme of theirs unravel and how they carry it out. That was really the most rewarding part of the film for me. And you're right. The one criticism it received was the fact that they did not really put the role of the Canadians out there during the telling of this story in this film. One of the most notable critics was former President Jimmy Carter, who said that while he thought it was a great film, he did enjoy the movie. He thought that the main hero, in his opinion, was Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor, who was played by Victor Garber in the movie. According to President Carter, it was Ken Taylor who really orchestrated the process. But again, since this was such a complicated scheme to hatch, we really don't know what happened behind the scenes with all these players. We do know that the movie was based in large part to Tony Mendez's autobiography, which is The Master of Disguise, and that is Tony Mendez is the Ben Affleck character. In fact, Tony Mendez was very, very cooperative during the making of this movie. He really collaborated. Apparently, he was their into the CIA. He opened a lot of doors for them in terms of the crew getting into CIA headquarters and checking out the scene and how things were set up. Mendez also has a cameo in the film, and in fact, even members of his family starred as extras in the film. So, you know what? The other controversy that I had read about, really small one, and it wasn't really a thing, but the fact that Ben Affleck stars as Tony Mendez, because Tony Mendez was of Latino European descent, and Ben Affleck isn't. But Tony Mendez was all right with that. He thought that it was fine for Ben Affleck to play.
I mean, I have no problem with that. It's called acting. They're climbing into the skin of another character. If that character happens to be of a different ethnicity, it's all the more challenging for that actor. I mean, I don't think it's misrepresenting the situation, but I know people have differing opinions about this. So,
You know, he pulled it off with, you know, thanks to the makeup and the costuming crew.
yeah.
He really did pull it off. And, you know, I am more a critic of Ben Affleck's acting than not, but really in this movie, he's shown.
I was going to say, Trish, I was going to say, if anything, that the criticism about Ben Affleck should not be that he's portraying an Hispanic man. It should be he's not that good.
He's not. But in this movie, you forget it is Ben Affleck, the bad actor. I mean,
Right.
he really, really did a decent job. And the fact that he also directed it, my God, kudos
Yeah.
to him for achieving this feat. Yeah.
Honestly,
What's
and
Best
he
Picture?
should stay behind the camera because it's a well-directed movie. I mean, he's pretty to look at.
He is pretty to look at. So yeah, kudos to him for this movie. Well deserved.
Yes.
All right. Speaking of great directors, we are going to go to 2012 and a film called Zero Dark 30. Catherine Bigelow was the director, and the main star of this movie was Jessica Chastain.
And wow, again, same year as Argo, another great film. This one centering around the hunt for bin Laden. And I mean, Jessica Chastain did a fantastic job.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Playing her role, investigate. I mean, it's such a riveting film. Oh, I did it again, riveting.
Well, it is.
It's an engrossing film. Everyone who lived through September 11th and remembers it, I mean, is old enough to remember it, was obsessed with that story. We got him, you know, the Navy SEAL Team 6 and, you know, locating his compound in Pakistan. And so this movie was very timely. I think about a year after they actually killed bin Laden, I'm guessing.
Well, actually, the screenplay was originally about the unsuccessful hunt for Osama bin Laden, but had to be revised after he was killed in 2011. So they didn't have much time to work to revise the screenplay, but this film came out a year later. So yeah, they were able to capture that moment. Yes.
I mean, what a lucky break for the screenwriter. I'm sure it was like a pain in the neck at the time, but what a better result, you know, for the story. And I actually read somewhere that the film, when it came out, raised a lot of eyebrows about the methodology and the information that was shared in the film. And it turns out, I don't know, have you discovered this in your research, that Leon Panetta was at a party honoring SEAL Team 6 and was having a conversation to a group where, I don't know if he'd had a couple of cocktails, but I think he was sharing more than he should have been sharing. And one of the people in this little inner circle was the screenwriter. I think his name was Mark.
Mark Bold.
Mark Bold was in this group. So he got it from the horse's mouth, a lot of the procedural stuff and some in the details of what went on. So it's very fact-based.
There you go. And you mentioned Mark Bowl, and Mark Bowl is a frequent collaborator of the director Catherine Bigelow. If you've seen the 2008 film The Hurt Locker, you will notice kind of the same feel from this movie as well, the same aesthetic, and that is because Bigelow, Bowl, and pretty much kept the production film crew intact from The Hurt Locker onto the movie. So you get that same grittiness to the picture.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny you mentioned that because I do sometimes confuse those two films in my head. They are very
you know,
similar.
I had to look this up because I was thinking Hurt Locker first. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So this picture received 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Screenplay, and went home with 1, which was Best Sound Editing. Jessica Chastain did win the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Dramatic Role. So a highly, highly acclaimed film when it came out, and it was really, really a great movie to watch. So I'm thinking, Deb, I saved the best for last because I just love this film. When you think political thriller, not only does this film top that list for me, but it also would make, one of my all-time favorite movies. Just because when you think political thriller, when you think edge of your seat, when you think just being unsettled to the very end of the film, this really checks all the boxes for me, and I'm sure it does for you too.
Yes.
And we're going to go back to 1962, and we're going to talk about The Manchurian Candidate.
And The Manchurian Candidate it's the iconic political thriller. The story of a young soldier held captive who is reciting the details of his capture in a way that makes one of the men in the group, played by Frank Sinatra, suspicious of what went on. The soldiers are all repeating the same line about their commanding officer.
Commander, yes.
And shame on me for not having the exact quote, but it's something like,
Raymond Shaw is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known. This guy gives you the heebie-jeebies.
I'll say it word for word. And it is this early concept of brainwashing and plants within the U.S. military and government. It has, that same kind of feel of No Way Out, but earlier, it's 1962. And to this movie's credit, watching it today, the performances, Angela Lansbury is brilliant in this film.
Creepy too.
In every way. I mean, she's the overbearing mother. She's the manipulative, in so many ways. But to be sucked into this film and forget that it's from the 1960s is really a tribute to the performances and the direction, because while it does have that highly stylized feel of a 60s film, the storyline is pertinent and relevant today. It's the same kind of conspiracy theory that fascinates people to this day. And it's, just a very, and it has, the way the film progresses, I don't want to give away the ending, but
no.
It has a very satisfying,
oh my gosh,
ending. That's all I'll say.
So back then, this film budget was $2.2 million, $1 million of which went to Mr. Sinatra for his salary. And again, speaking of Mr. Sinatra, by his own admission, his best work was always, according to him, in the first take. So if you think about this movie, and if you rewatch the movie, pay special attention to a lot of those Sinatra scenes. Most of them were blurry, out of focus, because they were the first take. And the director, I believe Mr. Frankenheimer was his name, agreed that was the best. And so they kept a lot of those scenes when Sinatra was out of focus because of that. And then later on, it got interpreted, some of the out of focus scenes, to the fact that Raymond Shaw was just
right
in his right mind, but there was actually a technical reason. It's
actually very effective. I thought it was intentional. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so it has been interpreted as a distorted point of view.
Yeah, that's cool.
So another Sinatra behind the scenes stuff, just because I love to talk about him. It's just so fascinating what he's been able to accomplish, and just the stories. So Sinatra was, in his late 40s by the time this film was made. So he had already spent a few years rat packing. And so he was, by most accounts, really a professional on set. Everyone loved working with him. There were some demands, though, and one of the demands was that filming was not to start until 11 a.m. every day. If you are familiar with studio productions, the earlier the better. They usually start at the crack of dawn.
Yeah.
But because Mr. Sinatra apparently was not able to go to bed before 5 a.m., they didn't start filming until 6 hours later at 11. So that was one of the requests. Another one of the requests was that he wanted to see every single bit of footage he was in. And they agreed. You know, he was Frank Sinatra. So what are you gonna do? So I just thought that really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me. It'd be fun, I think, for some Hollywood insider to write like a coffee table book of unusual diva demands.
Well,
Of
Frank
the
Sinatra
actors.
would, you know, he would take up an entire book.
Absolutely.
I read a few biographies of his that's pretty much what the subject matter was all about. And the movie, of course, had very heavy, intense political undertones, but there was also some of that, a lot of it actually going on behind the scenes. The head of United Artists at the time, Arthur Krim, apparently did not want to have anything to do with this movie, because this was a surprise to me. This movie was released in October 1962, which, as you know, was the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so when this movie was released, Mr. Krim of United Artists did not want to have anything to do with it. So enter Frank Sinatra. He called his buddy to call in a favor. He called President John Kennedy and reminded him that I raised about $2 million for your 1960 presidential campaign. So help us out here, because this movie is not going to be released. And so what this president...
I mean, it's like that scene in The Godfather, which is supposed to be based on Frank Sinatra, about, you know, Don Corleone pulling the strings to get the kid hired in the movie.
Exactly. So what does President Kennedy do? He made it known to Arthur Krim that he read the book, enjoyed the movie, and that the movie had his blessing, and voila, the movie comes out.
It's crazy. These hot button issues during politics, I imagine the movie studios are much less fearful now to challenge the norm or accuse. But, you know, there's blowback, I'm sure. So it's nice that President Kennedy gave him the thumbs up.
Yes, it worked out for everybody. So, I mean, as you can see, Deb and I are so enthralled by this particular genre. We enjoy it. So we're actually going to kind of continue the theme into next week. We are, you know, as we march right into election season, it's always a big deal. But as you said, Deb, really, really a big deal this year. Next week, we're going to talk about some of our favorite make-believe commanders-in-chief, our top movie presidents. So be sure you tune in for that. So as we end the show, we have our bonus sweet treat. We have something quite exquisite, and that is chocolate orange shortbread cookies.
Ooh.
Sounds pretty fancy. But, you know, if I can make it, you can make it. Combining two of my favorite flavors, chocolate and orange, really combined for one sublime treat. Deb, these cookies are thin, crispy, but really packed with a really, really rich chocolate taste with, you know, a hint of orange, courtesy of orange zest, and it is just so delicious. Really hits the spot.
Wow, that sounds delicious.
Yes. So we will have that recipe for you on gazellemagazine.com. We thank you, our viewers and our listeners. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Gazelle's YouTube channel by clicking on the Gazelle logo on this screen, and you will be among the first to get your hands on the latest Stir episodes. Debbie, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you again next time.
Thanks, Trish. See you
Bye.
next time.